We are in Brussels, Belgium, the capital of Europe, for the very first EIT Manufacturing Summit in person. During this two-day conference, we will hear from experts from industry, academia, and the startup worlds on the role of skills for a more sustainable manufacturing innovation in Europe.
Tamara Carleton is CEO of the Innovation Leadership Group, senior lecturer and author of Building Moonshots, 50 plus ways to turn radical ideas into reality. We want to know more about her vision of moonshots in manufacturing.
Your book is called Building Moonshots. Maybe for our listeners who are not familiar with the concept, what exactly is a moonshot?
The short definition of a moonshot is a big idea that has big impact. And for those that may not have heard this term before, it goes back to earlier stories about going to the moon. And in the 1960s, one country, the United States in particular, made the grand announcement, we are going to do this and put a person on the moon. So the moonshot was originally a literal shot to the moon. And it's important to mention because then it was about having a big idea and achievement to do something that was hard and not easy, but really challenging to mobilize and bring together the science and engineering community, but also to make it real. And there was a deadline attached in 10 years or less. So now when we talk about a moonshot, it has those flavors, but you'll hear other words too to describe it in terms of game-changing, transformational, disruptive, 0 to 1, all of this that's capturing not just the big vision, but the impact it'll have to change the world.
Yeah. And if there's one thing that we need in this day and age is to change climate change. It sounds a bit silly, but this is one of the big challenges of our times. What kind of moonshots could help us achieve this feat?
It's a great question, and my first response is just more moonshots generally. And climate change is interesting because this impacts everybody and animals and plants and industries around the world. And we have different groups tackling different elements. If I think about a moonshot language, the United Nations a few years ago introduced the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And this has caught on and helped people have a shared language to talk about big ideas that can make a difference. And then we've got foundations and venture groups such as Breakthrough Energies really trying to fund radical approaches to address climate change. And then you have small businesses and startups doing what they can as well. And some of them are moonshots. So you don't have to be a large team with deep pockets of funding. You have to be willing and have the courage to commit to a vision. And then what I love is these visions stack up and we can start to move the needle in terms of climate change, but all these other challenges that are facing humanity.
All right. If we take a small detour to manufacturing, to industry, one of the biggest polluting sectors, so to say, what kind of moonshot technologies could really help move the needle, as you put it so nicely?
Well, there's a number of technologies now that are definitely top of mind for the manufacturing sector, but also other sectors as well. I'm thinking, of course, artificial intelligence and generative AI and the questions that it's been raising in applications. But you also have quantum computing, and there's manufacturing aspects related to that. We've got kind of medical technologies that are crossing over into the manufacturing space. All of these, I think, impact how we consider what's possible, and as importantly, what we don't realize could be invented, because that to me starts to expand what we think about, and bringing in talent and knowing how does the talent invent and implement the new technology and connect that talent back to industry outcomes, so that not only do we have the tech, we've got people who can use it and connect it, and then that creates this virtuous ecosystem.
Yeah. So you're talking about the talents, for example, right? You also teach. Do you see more ambition maybe in these younger generations, perhaps?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes and no.
Maybe it's an unfair question. Unfair to compare.
Well, and I think this raises different perspectives or the point of view. If you're in a different generation, how do you look at the rising leaders, the youth, and the opportunities that we can help create for them? Because hopefully we still have a planet that they can take forward or send to the moon, Mars and further. But also, for the youth, they've had to grow up through the pandemic and adapt in many ways, deal with the influence of social media and other tools. So I find there is a hunger to do more, even with all the amount of information available, not necessarily the awareness of knowing where to start or what resources exist, or that you have a group such as EIT Manufacturing available, and it could be a mentor or a next step in a future career. And so to me, for my work, both teaching, but also with other groups who are involved with youth, is to say, how do we connect more of these communities and then also open more doors too, so that we can start to see these big ideas flourish.
Right. What kind of technologies are you most excited about? Or which ones have the most potential to have the biggest impact?
As I think about this question, what comes to mind is around how do we develop education and learning tools that create more tech to be developed. So it's not actually a particular one that strikes me. It's more around the conditions to allow us to create more capacity to do this. And I find, there's a lot of interest in being a top research institution. That's important. That gets the funding grants, builds up the kind of research discipline and state of knowledge. But also, how are we preparing the people around us? And it goes both with the younger generation, but also upskilling and reskilling. I came to my PhD mid-career as a kind of non-traditional candidate, and I personally appreciate all the ways and pathways that we can create that then set up the ability to say, I've got a favorite technology, and I've got one too, and I've got one, and perfect. How do we now bring that all together?
Yeah, maybe to break all of this specialization, to bring everyone together to get this more generalist, holistic approach, probably. No, perfect. Thank you. I think that's all of our time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes.
As head of lifelong learning at Volvo Group, Fredrik Elieson is a perfect person to chat with about the skills needed in industry and the importance of collaborations to help employees reach their full potential. So, Mr. Elieson, the topic of this manufacturing summit, the EIT Manufacturing Summit, is skills, or the role of skills to move the needle. As the head of lifelong learning of a large corporate, what is the role of lifelong learning for you in your corporate or in general?
I would say it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things, but the most important thing I can do is create good fundamental or a base for the leaders and the employees in the company to gain tools or to gain access or to gain connection to learning capabilities, so they have a chance to be the most competitive persons that we can have. And in my job, it's the responsibility to create this environment so that people actually can learn, easily can have access to things, understand what is the company needs, what are the needs that we actually are fulfilling, and how do we fulfill them, and help the people to engage themselves to drive this. As we talked about before, we need curious people. We need people that really wants to drive forward, to push for learning, to get knowledgeable, and to come into a situation. And then we need to create an environment to facilitate that. And we do that through cooperation with others. We do, of course, internal things. We work with universities. We work with the public ecosystem. We work with other companies. And of course, one important thing is we work with a lot of organizations like EIT Manufacturing or other organizations in order actually to realize this, because we cannot do it alone. It's fairly impossible. We need to, in the fast-pacing environment due to the technology, the harsh demand that we have to save the planet or to meet the net zero targets and others, it's crucial that with the speed that is needed, we cannot do that alone. We need to work together. And then to be in such a good situation where we could be part of these inspiring networks with all these innovative people, resources, all these ideas, it creates, I would say, a good fundamental base for us to grow and generate this. So this is also part of connecting that to our environment. And yeah.
And how can we imagine these kind of collaborations that you talked about? Which skills or which training do you focus on? Are these the soft skills, still some of the hard skills that some of the employees need? And what do the partners deliver for the universities, for example?
Fundamentally, we start from, so to say, the business needs that we have. We have our strategic needs, our aspirations, our mission, vision, where we want to go, and that sets the scene, so to say. That creates the needs, and then you have needs which is created, which is connected to the day-to-day operations for people, but you need to put them into the bigger context of our strategic way of working and where are we heading and where is the company going. So we need to, so to say, start there. Then when we have that clear for us, we need to look in different perspectives. How do we realize that? For instance, in the terms of EIT Manufacturing, we connect to different universities, other organizations, come up with ideas that will see how we can realize this. We are part of these goals and funding activities. We work with in as good way we can and connecting us to the other initiatives and see where could we actually bring in some value and get some value back. And the same way like that, we work with universities across Europe or across the world, where we connect to them, where we have the same interest, for instance, in R&D activities, in these deep tech knowledge activities. There we connect to them, and in certain instances we do R&D activities. Sometimes we do education activities, but it all leads to that we need to make sure that our employees are, so to say, competitive, because that makes the competitiveness of the company, and not only the company, but so to say the environment that we are in. And the European perspective, I mean, from us, we're a baseline of Swedish companies. So Sweden is Swedish competitiveness is good, but we are a European company. We have a strong foothold, I would say, in Europe. So we need to make sure that Europe is competitive as well. That's why we can't just work in one little region. We need to work across in the geographical context of it all, so to say.
So you start from the own business needs, bit of a case by case basis, and then you try to create these synergies with the collaboration partners. Right.
And it's very much up to ideas and how visionary you are. Sometimes it could be large initiatives across borders with a lot of multi-million-dollar companies together with the public funding ecosystem. Sometimes it will be smaller ones with organizations. So it varies a lot. And we also need to prioritize. Of course, we get a lot of questions. We cannot be everywhere, but where we see that we can both gain value, but also be part of adding value. So 1 + 1 is 3 and 4, and not that we are. Then we are back into the traditional, let's say, supplier buyer relationship. But that it's more like we're talking about building partnerships here, and building it with a complete environment around us.
How does that work? For example, do you have an example of a case where you as a corporate give value to either students or universities, something a bit more concrete, so that we can imagine this?
For instance, we do in the technology area, we do a lot of master theses all over the world with students, making sure that they progress and can do their. We offer in the same way as EIT does. We have summer schools for summer work for our there. We do research activities together with universities and researchers and there, so to say. We have our own PhD programs internally. We have numerous of things that we are doing. We heard in the panel discussion before a lot of different ways of cooperating. I think that we are part of doing most of all these types of things with different actors.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, for researchers, for example, it's fantastic if a corporate opens their doors for a collaboration, because it's not that easy, especially if you're in management, for example, management research, to find these corporations that are willing to share some of the data with them and to give them a peek behind the.
I think most companies are fairly willing to participate. Sometimes it could be due to timing, or that you don't, you feel that we have so much on our plate now, so we don't have time to engage in this. But that could be reason. But I think most of the companies, at least that we are part of or work together with, are open and happy to open our doors for quite many things.
And maybe for the young graduates
Yes.
amongst our listeners, what are some of the skills that they can themselves try to gain before entering the workforce?
First of all, I think you need to have an idea on which industry you are targeting. So if you're targeting our industry, it's always good because we are fundamentally engineering company. The STEM area is a good area where you can learn a lot of things. Of course, you do that through education. But then I think the personal skills are growing in importance. Some people call them the soft skills or personal skills or human skills. I mean, they go under many names. Of course, you can educate yourself a bit into leadership skills, etc. But I think you need to also practice being a leader.
Yeah.
You can do that during your education in certain things. You can do that in if you're doing a small startup or if you're doing something, but does not have to be such a formal leadership. It could also be that you drive certain informal projects or activities where you learn to interact with people. You're also learning that perspective also to communicate. You learn how to act around, socialize, act around people. You create an environment where people can learn from each other. So I think all those skills are always valued in a good way. And sometimes people are too shy to lift them up. They write so few words in their CVs. I mean, you should be proud of all these things that you're doing and really lift them up, because normally when you talk to people around recruitment today of what you're looking for, yeah, they're good in hard skills, but if they're not good in the human skills, it's so. So if you're competing against a person that has the same level of hard skills as you have, if you can sell in that you have better human skills, if we call them like that, you will have the edge, so to say. I think that's something that you, of course, you will learn throughout your whole life around this area. You will never get to fully learn, but that more you can learn in those areas are good.
So don't be shy to mention that you trained or coached this sports team.
No, it's good. Yeah,
highlight it.
I would say coaching small kids is harder than being a manager for old people. The kids are much more honest.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
No, so there are many aspects, but you should not be afraid. I mean, all types of knowledge could, in certain aspects, come to be used. Sometimes you don't know where you should use this, but it's really good. Yeah.
Robin Teigland is Professor of Strategy and Management of Digitalization at Chalmers University of Technology. We talked about which skills students need to succeed and how universities can teach them.
So there's a lot of talk about upskilling, reskilling, and needing the right skills for a better tomorrow, if you can put it that way. You're a professor at Chalmers University in Sweden.
Yes.
What are the skills that students or young graduates need the most to enter today's industry?
Yeah. There are many, many skills, but I think one of the most, well, actually, I'd like to focus on two. One, I think, is very much about just problem solving under uncertainty. being presented with a very difficult problem, a challenge, and without having the skills or the knowledge about really how to solve it. Technology is continuously changing. We have a world that is continuously changing and increasing pace of change. So we have to be very careful not to, teach skills that will already be old by the time they graduate. So for me, what I think is most important is really, how do you solve problems under uncertainty and fast pace of change? How do you actually structure a problem, take it apart, find the pieces that you need to actually solve that problem? And that's where I think the second skill is also about how you move from being a problem solver to a solution finder.
Mhm.
We are taught growing up that we should solve the problem ourselves. We should be independently solving the problems and getting the right answer all the time. If you think about, say, kindergarten through 8th grade and even in high school. Yes, we do have some project-based work, but it is still very much about you solving that problem by yourself. And I see today, even, for example, with all the discussion around generative AI, I'll come in, oh no, we can't have take-home exams anymore. We have to have it in the classroom so that they are only there and they've already read everything. And so this is about, we have heard this many times, right, about memorization and so on. So for me, it's about how do we enable students to go from problem solvers where they don't think about how do I solve it myself, but how do I leverage my network to find the solution to the problem that I'm faced with. So it might be that I need to contact other students. It might be that I need to work with industry. It might be that I need to work with the public sector. But how do I actually use my networks, leverage my networks across these different, industry, academia, public sector, as well as geographically, thinking where are the different pieces of the problem and or the solution, how can I put them together?
Mhm.
So these are really kind of two I would say core, going, the being a problem based, structuring, solving problems, but then being a solution finder to actually to take on those challenges.
So it's really about the soft skills in the
Yes.
future.
It's very much about soft skills because we can teach a lot of the hard skills, but if we see a fast pace of change in the hard skills, what you learn, might already be changing. So we have to also enable that continuous learning. I think curiosity, how to continuously learn, and I put that really under the other two skills of this, solving structured or solving problems under uncertainty and being a solution finder, because under those, that's about learning. You have to continuously learn to actually find the different pieces that would enable you to create the solution.
Yeah.
So,
You mentioned leveraging networks
yes.
just before. It's also a bit about leveraging the new technologies.
Yes,
right?
definitely,
Do
definitely.
you see different mindsets in your students, for example?
Yes and no. I think they come into the classroom, many of them, and are used to our traditional kind of old school type of education, and some of them even want to continue that because they know how it works. And I think one of our challenges in university is that there's so much focus on grades and grades to get the right jobs, right? And so they just want to know, what do I need to do to get the best grade so I can get the best job? And I think that's a challenge as a teacher. How do we enable them to think differently
Mhm.
around learning, to go from, taking a course to get a good grade to taking a course to enable learning?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a huge challenge that we have. So I see very much we have a mindset that we need to work both with those in charge of pedagogy in universities, but also with students.
Mhm.
When it comes to technology in that aspect, I think what happens then is that there are so many new technologies and we can use them to enable learning. But what another, challenge is that in many universities, you have teachers who don't understand the new technology, or there's no incentive for them to learn the new technology and use it in the classroom. To give an example, I worked a lot with virtual worlds, and when they first came out, well, it wasn't when they first came, but when were in the hype in 2007 to 2013, and I even created an island for the Stockholm School of Economics, where I was a professor previously, for our school, for our business school, for the students to learn in this virtual world. I organized a seminar for all other teachers to come and learn about this fantastic pedagogical tool, and no one came. The only two people who came to the seminar were visiting researchers at the business school. So we have an incentive structure that doesn't motivate teachers to really learn these new technologies, to apply them in the classroom. And then you have a discrepancy with the students who are learning them all the time. And so how can we enable them to meet so that we actually enable students to use these technologies in the classroom or in the educational system, because when they leave and go out and start working, they need to know how to use these technologies too. And it's not about reading a book and then coming back and regurgitating what we've already, what you've learned. So there's a lot of challenges along the way that we have to work with.
Yeah.
But I think we definitely, if I think about technology and leveraging networks, it's a huge possibility to enable you to leverage networks. You can use, this past in spring, I taught a course, Leading in a Digital World. I had 110 students, industrial economics students, and they were tasked with enabling citizen science within the marine industry. And so they had to think about a use case for some type of data to be collected. And then they had to work all the way back, and they actually had to build their own sensor for collecting data with a website where they could actually stream in the data, visualize the data, and then enable people out there to become their own citizen scientists by using this sensor. They had to go through the whole stream from identifying the data need to actually how you collect it. And this is that was a huge problem for them to be faced with. But it was also kind of very, very challenging. But I think it was a fantastic way to enable using technology in the classroom or in the educational system.
Yeah. Do you think there's a kind of a generational difference where education is kind of lagging behind?
Well, it's funny you asked that. My oldest son, he's 29. He dropped out of Rotterdam School of Management, their international business program. And I asked him, why did you do that? It was after the first year. He said, I've got my network. I don't need anything more. I said, what better place in the world can you get a network with fantastically smart people and have access to all types of different networks across the world? It's like RSM, fantastic. Mm-hmm. He said, I built my network and now I didn't, but aren't you interested in a diploma? No, what am I going to do with a diploma? I don't want to work for one of these big companies. I'm starting my own. So he's starting his own company. But his reflection, what he sees very much is it takes a generation for the learning, the research to get into the classroom. Mm-hmm. So, and he's seen that in the different disciplines. So what I learned, when I was a student, when I was doing my PhD, when I first started going to academia, that's what what he says that's what people are teaching. But the field has moved on. Yep. But then that doesn't get into the classroom yet. And so he sees that there is that type of gap. And I do see that because it does get back to the incentive structure. In university, you're motivated to produce papers, academic publications. That's what yes, it's great, the teaching, but how's your research? So I think we need to really rethink too, if we're going to push forward the next generation of skills.
Hans Maenhout is investment director of Finindus, a joint venture between ArcelorMittal and the Flemish region. We spoke with him about the role of corporate venture capital and the importance to collaborate with startups to accelerate manufacturing innovation.
Great. So with Finindus, you focus on sustainability, materials, circularity, Industry 4.0. What do you think that startups can contribute to the innovation goals or maybe the sustainability goals of large corporates?
Well, obviously they're a big source of technology and technology development. Traditionally big corporates have always relied on their own R&D departments to develop technologies. At a certain point in time, people realized that in the outside world there are also things being developed which are attractive. And then, often that led to M&A transactions. So people or companies were actually buying certain technologies. And I think, but that has already happened decades before. Companies have also realized that they do not necessarily need to buy into technologies. They can also support technology development outside of their R&D departments by cooperating with entrepreneurs that have great ideas and develop relevant and great technologies. And I think that sense of open innovation and using the external world and bring innovation from the outside in, not through the R&D department, but also not through the M&A department. I think more and more corporates have seen the value of that and have realized the value of that. And you see also over the last couple of years, actually, corporate venture capital has increased tremendously. I think, I don't know the exact numbers, I should verify them, but if you look at the number of VC transactions in which big corporates are involved nowadays, it has been growing steadily over the last, definitely over the last decade.
Yeah. What role do CVCs play in this story, as opposed to like the traditional venture capitals and investment vehicles?
So just to rephrase your questions, what are the advantages, I would say, of a CVC versus a purely financial? I guess every VC investor or type of VC investors brings their own advantages, but you see what you have more in a venture capital investment than in any other investment that you would make is that venture capital investors want to have an influence in the company that they invest in, either by bringing financial discipline, by bringing in market expertise, technology expertise. So they're not just there just to control their investment, but they want to contribute. There's a consulting aspect to that. And if you look at it from a corporate perspective, what a corporate could actually bring to a startup is obviously it network. It is contacts within its own organization, to the outside world, to suppliers, to other market players. That's a very important aspect. It is a lead into the big corporation. So it exposes the technology and the technology company to the inside world, so to speak. But what also should not be underestimated is the fact that a corporate makes an investment into a startup has a very important signaling function. It adds to the market credibility, the street credibility of the startup to be associated with a big brand name. And I think that's also maybe a bit more intangible advantage, but a very important advantage of corporate venture investments.
Yeah. It's maybe also an advantage for the startups in the sense that we also at EIT Manufacturing work with a lot of industrial technology startups, and we see very often that especially for hardware startups, it's very difficult to find investments. So perhaps this is also a good angle for them to know that there is a company backing them that might also potentially use their project.
That is one. I will come back to that, but I'll make a caveat on that. But it is true that we don't find a lot of investors that are willing to step into a hardware investment. Actually, one of my colleagues once had this saying, which was I always liked. It said, "Well, if you invest into a ICT-based startup." You give them money and they spend all the money on marketing, because developing a product is not that expensive. You need a computer and some smart guys. And he said, if you're doing hardware investments, you invest, you spend all your you spend all your money on product development, and then you have to spend all your money again on marketing. So it is more complicated. It is more difficult. Also because on the other side, you have buyers that are typically quite conservative. For them, there is sometimes more to lose by trying a new technology than there is to win. The idea of you have never been fired for choosing IBM is that to convince a big industrial group to use a new technology, to use a new supplier is a big step. And there's a lot at risk. And so it takes a long time. It's long sales cycles. It is convincing people. It's doing piloting. And having VC money, hopefully, if you pick the right CVC, can help you to accelerate the piloting. Because at the end of the day, seeing is believing. You're selling products to companies run by engineers, and if they haven't seen it themselves, they will not believe it.
Yeah, so that's a big caveat. I think you're right. The de-risking of new technologies in corporates is something that we have to work on.
and one of my colleagues from former colleague, because she's retired now from Chevron, once said, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, to me, it resonated very well that it is sometimes easier to get venture capital money from a corporate than it is to get a PO from a corporate.
Okay.
Because venture capital money is run by the venture capital team, and they're used to dealing with risk. Where if an operations guy issues a PO, I mean, he's usually not willing to run that type of risk, and he really wants to know that the technology he's buying into actually works, and that the company that supports it will actually be able to support it also in the long run.
Of course. So you work with a lot of exciting new technologies. What are one or two maybe lesser known or lesser talked about technologies that could have a large impact on the manufacturing industry?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of lesser known technologies anymore. I think we have a lot of technologies now that are talked about but can have a huge impact. Obviously AI, but that's not my domain, can have an impact on any company, also on manufacturing companies. We've seen, for example, since we started looking into Industry 4.0 as a topic, which is about 5-6 years ago, something like that, the deal flow in our portfolio has exploded. I mean, it's probably half of our deal flow right now is around digital. That was something that we didn't anticipate in the past. Also, everything around hydrogen and renewable energy has increased because that's one of the biggest challenges. And especially, we have a steel background, so carbon dioxide emissions are a huge topic. Where we saw that 5 years ago, okay, everybody was scouting for technologies, but today people want to see pilots in place. People need to start experimenting with that because the deadlines are so short to make progress. That and then also everything around circularity, I think, is something that is going to become even more and more important. Next to the energy question mark, it is the availability of raw materials, the reuse of raw materials, rare earth metals, for example, battery recycling, for example, but also making products from a perspective that they're easy to recycle. So thinking in advance about the circularity aspects, and then having the right technology to actually close the circle and bring back the materials where they should be. And that's a big challenge. And okay, that's not unknown technologies. I think technologies still, for a large part, need to be further developed, depending on the type of materials you're talking about.
Of course. I think that's all for our time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to subscribe to The Art of Making on the podcast platform of your choice. We're also more than happy to hear from you, so reach out through the EIT Manufacturing website, that is eitmanufacturing.eu, or find us on the usual social media channels. Take care and talk soon.